In 1975, you could walk into a Cessna dealership and fly away in a brand new 172 Skyhawk for $16,055. That same airplane today, 50 years older, with thousands of hours on the airframe, a faded interior, and half-century-old technology, now sells for over $100,000, sometimes $150,000, sometimes more. Think about that for a moment. A used car from 1975 is worth a fraction of its original price. A house from 1975 has appreciated, sure, but it's been renovated, upgraded, modernized. This airplane has none of that. Same engine design from the 1960s, same basic instruments, same aluminum skin now approaching its golden anniversary. And yet it commands 6 times what it cost when Richard Nixon was still a fresh memory in the White House. Here's where it gets stranger. A brand new Cessna 172 today costs nearly $500,000. That's not a typo. The same fundamental airplane with essentially the same performance now carries a price tag that would have purchased a small fleet 50 years ago. Something happened to aviation that defies every rule of economics. And the story behind this impossible math reveals a hidden catastrophe that nearly destroyed an entire American industry. The 1970s were general aviation's absolute golden age. Cessna's Wichita factories hummed with round-the-clock activity, pushing out over 2,172 Skyhawks every single year. The assembly lines never stopped. Across America, small airports thrived with flight schools, weekend pilots, and families who saw aircraft ownership as achievable as buying a boat. In 1978 alone, American manufacturers delivered approximately 18,000 general aviation aircraft. Picture that for a moment. 18,000 brand new airplanes rolling off production lines in a single year. Flying wasn't just for the wealthy elite. It was for dentists, farmers, salesmen, anyone with a dream and a reasonable down payment. But here's what nobody anticipated. A legal time bomb was ticking beneath the industry's feet. Product liability lawsuits began multiplying like a virus throughout the system. The problem wasn't defective aircraft. The problem was longevity. Cessna built their planes so well that aircraft manufactured in the 1950s were still flying decades later. And when those aircraft crashed, often due to pilot error or poor maintenance, lawyers discovered something remarkable. They could still sue the manufacturer every single time. Think about this for a moment. A plane built before the moon landing crashes in 1985. The pilot made a fatal mistake. But the manufacturer faces a multi-million-dollar lawsuit anyway. How do you defend against that? How do you insure against infinite liability? The numbers tell the devastating story. Industry-wide liability insurance costs exploded from $24 million in 1978 to $210 million by 1985. That's nearly a 9-fold increase in just 7 years. By the late 1980s, manufacturers were absorbing between $70,000 and $100,000 in liability costs for every single aircraft they built. The math became impossible. Production collapsed from 18,000 aircraft in 1978 to just 4,000 by 1986. Then it got worse. By 1994, American manufacturers delivered only 928 aircraft total, a staggering and unprecedented 95% collapse. Factories that once employed thousands fell silent. Somewhere between 28,000 and 100,000 American jobs simply vanished. An entire industry, once the envy of the world, brought to its knees not by foreign competition, not by technological failure, but by courtroom warfare. In 1983, Cessna posted its first annual loss in company history. The writing was on the wall, and 3 years later, the world's largest single-engine aircraft manufacturer would make an announcement that changed everything. In 1986, Russell Meyer, chairman and CEO of Cessna Aircraft Company, stepped before the press with a declaration that would reshape American aviation for generations. Cessna was halting all piston aircraft production immediately, completely. The world's largest manufacturer of single-engine aircraft would build no more. But Meyer didn't stop there. He made a promise that seemed almost impossibly bold. If Congress passed meaningful product liability reform, Cessna would return. The factories would reopen. The workers would come back. Until then, silence. What followed was nearly a decade of political warfare. Industry lobbyists descended on Washington. Kansas politicians, representing the heart of American aviation manufacturing, led the charge. The General Aviation Manufacturers Association, labor unions, aircraft owners, and pilots all united behind a single, desperate goal. The choice was brutally simple: reform or extinction. Here's what made the fight so difficult. Trial lawyers had built extraordinarily lucrative empires on aviation lawsuits. Consumer advocates argued that limiting liability would endanger passengers. The battle dragged on year after year, while the industry continued bleeding jobs and hope. Then, on August 17, 1994, President Bill Clinton signed the General Aviation Revitalization Act into law. 3 pages. That's all it took. 3 pages that created an 18-year statute of repose, protecting manufacturers from liability on aircraft older than 18 years from the date of any accident. The endless liability tail was finally severed. Russell Meyer kept his word. In 1996, Cessna reopened production at a brand new facility in Independence, Kansas. The 172 Skyhawk returned. But here's what nobody anticipated. The damage was already tragically permanent. For 10 years, not a single new Cessna 172 had rolled off any production line. 10 years of zero trainers entering flight schools. 10 years of the existing fleet aging, crashing, being scrapped for parts, and never being replaced. The approximately 44,000 Skyhawks ever built became a fixed number, frozen in time, slowly shrinking with every accident and every retirement. Think about what this actually means. Unlike cars, where manufacturers produce millions of new units annually, the supply of training aircraft essentially stopped growing. The fleet that existed in 1986 was largely the same fleet that would need to serve aviation for decades to come. GARA ultimately saved the manufacturers, but it couldn't resurrect the aircraft that were never built. And meanwhile, a crisis was quietly building that would transform those aging Skyhawks into something nobody expected: appreciating assets. When Cessna resumed production in 1996, optimists believed affordable aviation would return. They were catastrophically wrong. A brand new Cessna 172 Skyhawk today costs between $400,000 and $550,000. That's not a misprint. The same fundamental aircraft design, with essentially identical performance to that 1975 model, now carries a price tag approaching $500,000. But here's the truly shocking part. Even at those astronomical prices, production remains a tiny fraction of what it once was. In 2024, the entire American general aviation industry delivered just 1,772 piston aircraft total. Compare that to 18,000 in 1978. The manufacturing infrastructure never recovered. The workforce never fully returned. The institutional knowledge that built those golden age aircraft has largely retired or passed away. So what happens when supply is permanently constrained, but demand explodes? You get exactly what we're witnessing now. Boeing's latest projections paint a staggering picture. The aviation industry will need between 649,000 and 674,000 new pilots globally by 2042. North America alone requires approximately 130,000. Airlines are offering signing bonuses, slashing experience requirements, and competing desperately for qualified aviators. Flight schools are expanding as fast as they can find aircraft. And there's the impossible bottleneck. You cannot train pilots without training aircraft. In 2018, the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association reported something remarkable. Prices for Cessna Skyhawks built between 1968 and 1976 jumped 20% in just months, not years, months. Flight schools were bidding against each other for 50-year-old airplanes because nothing else existed at reasonable prices. Here's the brutal mathematics driving this insanity. Every vintage Skyhawk that crashes is gone forever. Every aircraft parted out for components permanently shrinks the available fleet. Every hangar fire, every training accident, every aging airframe retired from service represents irreplaceable inventory that will never return. The average general aviation aircraft in America today is 38 years old. These machines are flying museums, appreciating antiques that happen to still earn their keep. That 1975 Cessna 172M that sold for $16,000 has become a six-figure asset, not because it improved. It hasn't. The engine design dates to the 1960s. The avionics are often original. The airframe has accumulated thousands of hours and decades of wear. It appreciated because the world that created affordable aircraft no longer exists. The story of the Cessna 172's impossible economics isn't really about airplanes at all. It's about what happens when lawsuits kill an industry, when a decade of zero production creates permanent scarcity, and when exploding global demand crashes into a supply that can never recover. Those 1975 Skyhawks aren't just aircraft anymore. They're time capsules from an era when America built 18,000 small planes a year, when flying was accessible, when the dream of flight didn't require a mortgage. Today, flight schools compete for aging trainers, while airlines face a pilot shortage that could reach 674,000 professionals over the next 2 decades. Every vintage 172 that survives becomes more precious. Every one that doesn't is gone forever. The fundamental design hasn't changed much in 70 years, but the world around it has transformed completely, legally, economically, demographically. And in that transformation, a simple 4-seat trainer became an appreciating asset that defies every rule of depreciation. The Cessna 172 didn't beat economics. Economics simply stopped applying. But this is only one piece of aviation's hidden financial story. Subscribe now, because next time we're exploring an even stranger paradox hiding in the skies.